Welcome to the American Diversity Report, where we interview innovative change makers and diverse people who make a difference in this world. I'm Deborah Levine, editor of the American Diversity Report, and your host today. And with me is Calvin Hosey. He is head of operations and payment partnership at RegPac, a software leader in automation of billing and other business processes. As a Black tech executive who climbed the corporate ladder for the last 20 years, Calvin has a breadth of knowledge to share with other people of color looking for insight into career development and execs wanting to navigate DEI in tech. Welcome, Calvin.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Very excited to be here.
Well, it's amazing what you have been able to do. I was looking at your bio and wondered, how did you get started in tech?
Well, the simple answer of how I got started in tech is I needed a job. It's not a very romantic story of the start of how I got into it. I was in my mid to late 20s. I had just moved to Seattle. Life was kind of tumbling downhill. Girlfriend broke up with me, just lost a job, and I had been just scouring for an opportunity to work anywhere. And I jumped on Craigslist and I saw this kind of fairly cloak and dagger job offering. And I assumed, okay, this is either going to be really fun or it's going to be a bit of a scam. And it turned out to be kind of my first entry into tech. It was a contractor job. I worked at Google, worked there for 3.5 years, I believe. And that was kind of how I got started. And from there, I loved it, felt I had some aptitude for it, and just tried to keep it rolling.
I love it. So you got your first job off of Craigslist, huh?
Yeah, it was. It's not something that I don't think anybody uses too much for jobs. But yeah, back then I would spend 5, 6, 7 hours a day looking for work, and that was one of the ones where, like I said, it just something about it struck me a little bit differently than the normal. Hey, apply here, do the sales. Apply here, do the marketing. Apply here, do the insert job, and clicked it, and the rest was history.
Wow. The rest is history. It is. You've certainly kept on going, and you have climbed the ladder for sure.
Yeah, it's been fun, honestly, because back then when I started, it was a quite literal. I was at the floor. I was at the floor professionally. Personally, it was kind of troubling too, and it was one of those situations where, when you talk about, like, there is no black Elon Musk, right? There is no black Sam Altman, and so in terms of trying to figure out where I wanted to go with me, the climb was a little tricky, right? Because I had to learn as I was going. Sometimes you make mistakes, sometimes you pick the wrong direction. But one of the things I tried to keep doing was look back on my past rather than try and look up to a role model. And with me, from the beginning of my life, I had my parents kind of instill two very solid things within the core of kind of how I work, which is they always spoke to me about two things: the reality of work, which is I'm pretty sure a lot of people of color parents have had this talk before, where you have to work twice as hard to get half as far as anybody else. And for me, even when I was younger, I didn't even apply it to like the racial aspect of things. I just assumed for me, Calvin, the kid born in Bakersfield, just needed to work harder than everybody else. And so they instilled the reality of that, along with, a little support and idealism where, they say, you can do anything you want if you put your mind to it. And so when you have the combination of those two things, where my parents pushed back from the point I've been able to form memories, um, like I said, the climb was rough, but it was also interesting. It was never there was never an idea in my head where halfway through I was like, oh, this is exhausting. I don't want to do it anymore. It was just like, hey, this is a fun challenge. This is kind of what I want to do. This is kind of what I want to look into. I have aptitude for it. Let's see how far we can get.
I'm always amazed at the influence our parents have on us to
Hmm.
persevere, to try things, to go forward. I'll share with you that when I was 16 in the 60s and computer programming was first offered in my high school, my mother told me I should take that. And I said, no, I'm going
Wow.
to be a poet. And she said, this is not a suggestion, dear. This is the future. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
you did. And so I did. And it was the smartest move I think I ever made. And
Yeah. It
I
it's
wouldn't have if she hadn't, made it clear of what my
yeah.
choices were and weren't.
Well, for me, it was my parents kind of started the journey, right? Um, they I don't think they would be offended if I said they are not tech savvy in any sense of the word. I am the kid who comes and kind of helps program and adjust and do everything. If there's a light blinking somewhere, they call me and tell me, hey, we need your help to figure out the remote, right? For me, the first person I kind of had that conversation with that you had with your mother was actually a teammate of mine when I was in college. I was in Berkeley. I was playing football, and um, in my head, at that time, I was only going to be a football player. Like I was going to make it to the NFL. I was going to, name in the bright lights. And I'll never forget. It was his name. My teammate's name was Reggie. This video game called Metroid Prime had just been released, and it was like the first time this video game had done 3D. And some of your listeners who know about video games will instantly recognize that. And we're sitting there in the dorms, being, college athletes and college students, making jokes and playing video games. And at one point, Reggie stops and he looks at me and he's like, "You should do this." And I was like, "Do what?" And he's like, "You should do tech stuff. You should go computer science major. Like you should go. Your brain is really good for that." And at the time, lacking any sort of foresight, my response was kind of similar to yours, where it was, well, I'm not going to hit no keys. I'm going to hit people. I got to play football. You got to hit people. And I'm very glad he had that kind of breakthrough with me because Reggie was younger than me too. He wasn't older. He wasn't like somebody to look up to. He wasn't an upperclassman. I was actually at Cal before him. It's just whatever he saw in the conversation that we had or the whatever interactions we had, he saw that I was the person that would have some sort of tech aptitude, and I should be one of the people to dive in it. Now, I didn't get to that until 8, 9 years later, and proved him right. But I kind of had a similar situation where, and that's why I say like it wasn't necessarily anybody to look up to. It was kind of looking back at the conversations with the parents, the conversations with Reggie. Like Reggie said, you should do this, and when you combine those elements, where hey, there's somebody that doesn't exist in the space, and your parent still says, just hey, if you think you can do it, go for it, which is kind of what I did. Reggie kind of conversation popped in my head where he says, you would be good at this. And, my first kind of dipping my toe in the water with that contractor job, I had a lot of aptitude towards it. And honestly, that's two of the elements where I'm literally and figuratively sitting in the seat right now, right here with you.
I love it. And I will share with you that it took a little more than 8 or 9 years for me. I know how it works. It's at first what, and then I got my master's degree in urban planning, and they had a
Mhm.
beginner's computer class. I was sitting in it, and a professor comes to the door and yanks me out of it, saying, "You're not a beginner." And I didn't do that much. What? And I went into a more advanced class, and I ended up being the female IT director in the early 1980s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. Who knew? But it's amazing how fate takes you in a direction where you need to go.
You know what, Deborah, this is me and you have a lot of weird similarities with our stories. 'Cause this is not a joke. Almost the same year that I had the conversation with Reggie, we had a director of football operations at on the team, and his name was Paul Shea, and everybody called him Pablo. Still have no idea why the nickname Pablo, but you just say Pablo. One day, I was walking through the football office, just head in the clouds, thinking about school and food, which is usual Calvin stuff. And he pops out of an office, and he's, "Hey Calvin, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm just walking, thinking about stuff." He's like, "Come here real quick." He brings me in, drags me in there, and he starts talking about mortgages. And I'm in my head, I'm like, why? Like I'm sitting there, I understand what he's talking about. He's talking about principal and interest and how to calculate the payments, all the stuff. Stuff I'd in general never heard before. But um, towards the end, he's asking me questions. I'm getting all the math right, and I finally get to the point. I'm like, "So why did you drag me in here, man?" And he was like, "I feel like you would be a really, really talented business person." And again, like foresight on his, like in my head, I'm thinking like I'm gonna be the next Lawrence Taylor. I'm just gonna be ripping and running up and down the field until like I'm blue in the face. But he saw some sort of business foresight, and one of the reasons I intentionally picked RegPack. So like when my stint at Google ended, and I kind of had to sit and have like a internal monologue slash conversation with myself. It was like, okay, how do I figure out the next path for me, right? Because I know I want to stay in this path. And one of the first things that Pablo told me about business is he explained his first business was a brake business. And he stumped me with the question of, why do you think I chose this? And it took me, like, I'm just guessing wildly. And finally, he says, well, no matter how far a car's technology advances, they always have to stop. Which it's a very, very simple kind of idea, but it's also brilliant. But that's also kind of why I intentionally chose RegPack, because at the core of it is payments, right? Like you introduced, it's payments and it's billing. And for us, for me specifically, like whether personally my credo, just philosophically as a business, there every business is always going to need to bill something else. Every business is always going to need to collect payments. And so um, weirdly, me and you kind of have like the same steps where parents are intervening and giving us advice. And in my case, I had the extra Reggie. I'm sure you probably had one too that said, "Hey, Deborah, maybe you do this." And somebody in Pablo's case, he just, like I said, just grabbed you out of his office. You had a teacher that said, "Hey, you're not a beginner. What are you doing in here? Come on, we're gonna have fun and make sure we get something on your level." And so um, those three things kind of, like I said, it kind of that's the core of kind of how I'm here. Like it's I mean, you can call it fate, and I am completely comfortable with that. I'm a person who, and this is one of those things that I'll read executive interviews, and they tend to speak to younger generations as though luck is not a thing, fortune is not a thing. That is, for me, it's a very real element and a very real component, right? Like it's sometimes the universe looks out for you in a way that you can't control, no matter how hard you work, right? And so um, I think this is a bit of fate of us talking because like I said, we share a lot of the similar beats, right? So
Eh,
few people popping and having conversations at the right point to make sure we end up in the place we probably should be.
right. Well, one of the things that strikes me about where you are now is your teamwork. You were
Yes,
on a team all the way back in that football life of yours, right?
yes.
Now you're on a team that's different, but I bet it's not as different as we think.
No, not really. So the most important element I learned from being a football player is if we're speaking to diversity, there is like diversity, like the general characteristics we think, right? Like orientation, race, um, culture, right? But even within those, there's second layers of levels of diversity. There's where people are from. There's what they culturally identify as. Their whether or not they went to college or not. That in itself can be something that like can determine whether somebody is following one path or the other, right? Like it's um for example, like just on my team alone, there is an actor. We have a stay-at-home mom. We have somebody who was an English major, started out as an English major and now loves tech. We had somebody who was working in the entertainment industry. We had somebody who was a former athlete. We have a former teacher. I think it's valuable to have all types of perspectives on all levels. Because when you do have a team that is truly diverse, it is a strategic asset, right? Like I probably shouldn't admit this, but sometimes when you see a company roll something out and you see the messaging, you can almost see who was in the room when they made that decision, right? Like I don't want to have to see something that we put out and have it be the idea of somebody can look at it and be like, oh wow, they completely missed the mark on that one, right? When you have somebody with a team that's compiled of people with different backgrounds, different cultures, different orientations. What you do is you try to make sure that every time you put something forward that's client facing, it almost always tries to cover everybody's perspective, right? And that's what we want to make sure, not just for us, like philosophically, what we want to do is make sure everything's inclusive, but also it's a good business strategy. Like if you have a message and a platform and an ideal that covers as many bases as possible, um, you're going to have a great time when it comes to the market.
Yeah, absolutely. You can appeal to a wider audience, a broader audience, and keep going.
Absolutely. And for us, I mean, for me, I can say for me, when I build a team, there are several things that I look at and what I don't look at, right? So like just the conversation around diversity is always a tricky one, right? Because when you are running a team, you always want to make sure that you get the highest qualified people, but you, like you said, like there's a balance, and and I can understand how executives, when they are looking for people, it can be tricky to try and hit certain benchmarks as far as like I said, just the base characteristics. But what I try to do is at least when I'm trying to bring somebody aboard on board, there are certain things I just don't even look at. Like honestly, when I look at a resume, I don't even look at the name. I try and like blank it out. I try to grade it out in my mind. I don't check if they went to college or not. It's not something that I particularly pay attention to. Um, what I do, kind of, especially as it involves with technology, is what I do is I try to find people who have a good sense of communication and a good sense of being able to convey their logic. And I think when you are trying to build a team of any level of diversity, if you always start a process that leans on core competencies and core constructs versus who the person is, I think eventually you'll lead to a place where the team I built, where like I said, like it for me, I can't tell you if anybody graduates from college or not. I don't know. I don't ask. Like if they did, that's awesome. If they didn't, okay, that's cool too. That doesn't diminish who they are, what they're capable of in my eyes.
So when you think of the next generation coming up and looking for jobs, I gather that you would like for them to think about tech and be on a team
Absolutely,
like yours.
absolutely. Well, I would, but I would like. I mean, I guess this is where I would impart like some wisdom as an old person to the young folks. Like, um, I guess that's where I would say um, the word I would use to describe tech is, and it's a common word that gets used a lot with their generation. It's a diaspora, right? Like
What?
there are diaspora. There's levels to it, right? So um, big tech is the new corporate. And if you want to work in big tech and you like the structure of how kind of the Fortune 500, the traditional corporate jobs work, you want to show up in a button up, you want to go into jobs, do the 9 to 5, clock in, clock out, um, be within that structure, you can do that. If you want to work for a company that's freewheeling and open culture and um, permanently remote, right? They have that option too. They also have everything in between, right? It's one of those things where um, I would advise anybody to like start with the internal, start with trying to figure out what you want to do. Um, start figuring out whether you're okay in a certain culture. Start figuring out what you want to do as a person because as as the industry goes, like it's grown to the point that right, some tech companies have fleet services. So you could be a mechanic working at a tech company, and that technically does make you a tech worker. Like you don't work on the code for me. That's what I categorize them as. They don't work on the code, but they are working for a tech company. If you're in that tech sector, you always just need to make sure, hey, you don't have to forget everything you are to go work in tech. You don't need to say, well, I've been an accountant for 15 years. I need to throw away all that experience and learn how to code. Like you don't need to do that. You can take that and apply that directly. There is space for you to transition laterally. Um, as far as as far as being able to search and kind of hunt and look for jobs, I think it would be irresponsible not to acknowledge kind of the two main components that everybody knows exist. Like nepotism exists, like cronyism exists. That like those that's real. Like that's not it's not theoretical. That's not made up. Um, and so if you are going into tech, I'd say honestly, start early, make friends early, network early, and that doesn't mean you have to go to conferences or you have to show up to special events or you have to buy specific classes. This generation has a very large advantage in the sense that they're the internet age, and a lot of the interconnectivity they already need already exists, right? So you can find a community of tech forward people on Reddit. You can find it on Instagram. You can find it on just kind of the normal avenues that they already exist in. And that would be the place I would say to start, right? Start internal, start with you, start where you want to go. And then from there, once you know it, start making some friends, start shaking some hands. Like I said, you don't need to um, do the thing. You don't need to do the things that I heard when I was 20, right? Like you don't need to show up at the job fair with the suit and tie on and the briefcase full of resumes to hand out, right? Like it's a different world now. So like lean into that advantage. That's 100% what I would say to do.
Wow. And what would you say to the tech companies who want to attract these young people? How should they do it? What should they do?
That one is trickier. I know, just like I said, from my perspective, what I would say is be authentic. I would say um, be authentic from a company perspective, right? Like don't try to Like I'm old enough to remember Google's slogan being "Don't be evil," right? Like it's not something that the I don't want to say it's not something that doesn't apply, but like they had to change to become the company they are today, right? Um, be authentic about who you're looking for in the company culture you exude, and you're going to attract people no matter what, right? Whether you are Google, people are going to want to work at Google no matter what, right? But even if you're a smaller firm, make sure that you are communicating how you work, what you want to do, your goal, your philosophy, and there's always going to be an audience there to try and apply for it. It's like I said, it's not a monolith. It's a varying degree. There is diversity in tech, just from philosophies, how people work, how they want to work, how they want to gather workers. And I think in both sides, well, on one side, they need to be authentic to who they are. And on the company side, they need to be authentic to who they're trying to recruit and pull in. I think both sides would eventually benefit a ton in the end.
I would totally agree. And I think that technology, whether it's large companies or small companies, is providing some opportunities here for people
Absolutely. Yeah,
um, like both of us who didn't really think in those terms at first, but we should be
yeah,
open-minded, right?
exactly. And my thing is, I like everybody that I talk to, because I have friends in my life, of course. Some of them are in tech because I go to Cal. It's kind of like it's around Silicon Valley. It's the heart of everything digital, basically, on the planet. And some of my friends who aren't, I would just pop in and just shoot the idea, right? Hey, why not just take a coding class real quick? Even if you don't do anything with it, it's not something that wouldn't benefit you in the long run. And I think for me, like the part that I really love, and this is more about the internet than just tech specifically, is that there are a lot less gatekeepers now, specifically using information as a gatekeeping mechanism. And so that's the part that I love. Like I love that Harvard has their courses online for free. I think it's the best idea. Even if you can't, like in the end, you don't get the piece of paper that said I am a Harvard student, you can still be a Harvard student. And when you try to think flexibly and, like you said, think open-minded about just the resources that you have at your disposal, little magic machine that fits in your pockets that can answer any questions you can come up with. Um, like always kind of lean on that. Like that's I mean, as long as you're open-minded, you can find almost anything. And well, I mean, the double-edged sword to that is you can also almost find anything. So
Yes, indeed. Uh, I will share with you that I founded the American Diversity Report 16 years ago, right? That's how long it's been online.
yeah,
And I do it all myself, right?
wow. Okay, that part's genuinely impressive. I don't want to cook. I don't want to warm stuff in the microwave by myself anymore. I like stuff being easy. That sounds like a ton of work for you, but yeah, I
Yes.
appreciate it. I like being on this platform. This has been a pretty good conversation.
And it is, and as technology changes and brings us new opportunities, right? I'm sure you're still learning as well as me. There's so much out there, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, with me, it's like there was a report that I saw the other day. So it was about AI, and um, the big number. They were like, AI is going to take 300 million jobs worldwide, right? And so what I do whenever I see something like that, like in the headline like that,
Yeah.
is I like to apply what I call common sense math. And so I just kind of popped into it, and it said 300 million jobs. And I was like, okay, I wonder how many jobs are globally. Globally, it's around 3.5 billion jobs. So even if AI took away up to the 300 million that they claim, there's still 3 billion jobs on the planet. And on top of that, every time we do a leap in progression, a leap forwards with technology, that always begets other jobs too. And so, like for me, anytime I see a leap forward, I always see it as an opportunity more than a bane, right? It's okay, cool. That is a new tool that we can use to kind of move forward and better ourselves, but also that tool is going to need people to figure out how to manage it, right? How to adjust it, how to tweak it, how to make sure it's getting pointed in the right direction. And so like for me, I'm excited for the future. Like I'm hoping at some point we get hoverboards. I've been waiting for those ever since Back to the Future first came out, and Michael J. Fox was hovering across the water with them. I'd also like a rocket pack if anybody's listening and wants to invent those. But yeah, I'm excited about what the future is going to hold. I couldn't, in my wildest dreams, I couldn't have imagined being 7 years old and having to use payphones and rotary phones, and you had to do handwritten letters and you had to know everybody's address, to where I am now. Like I can see where my parents are if I want to share my information with, like, you can just see, hey, you got a little beacon in your pocket. It's basically a little magic machine that does whatever you want. So I'm kind of excited where the future's going to go. Like I would have never, I don't ever have trepidation when it comes to progress, because progress means we're only going to kind of get better. And like I said, as we get better, there's going to be jobs that we can't foresee ever needing. They're going to start coming about.
Is it okay if I quote you? I think that is wonderful.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. I love the optimism, the energy. That's what we need going forward. You're who we need, Calvin.
Well, hopefully I'll be one of those people in the next 5 or 10 years. That's the goal. The goal is to keep climbing, keep having fun, keep working with my team. Like we're trying to carve our own little space in the universe over here. We're trying to do it in the best way we know how, in the right way we know how. But yeah, as far as like looking forward, yeah, hey, forge ahead and have fun. Like that's
I love it.
for me, that's kind of how I look at all things.
Oh, thank you so much. Audience, remember that. Forge ahead and have fun. That's what
Yep.
we're going to do. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap this up?
For anybody's listening who found whatever I said intriguing, the whole company kind of runs with the same philosophy that you saw me espouse here. Everybody's trying to work harder and get better. Go to regpacks.com, regpacks.com. Check it out. Click a demo if you want to do a demo. But yeah, that's the only thing I have to shill here.
I love it. Thank you so much. It's been a joy to talk with you. So,
oh yeah, this has been great.
Yeah. And audience, I know you'll enjoy this too. And we'll see you again next time. Thank you for tuning in. Take care.